My body is strong, human. I'll give you strong children, begged the captive alien woman. Snow fell in slow, silencing sheets over the bones of a dead colony. Kane crouched near the wreck of his crash pod, breath coiling in the bitter air. His gloves were torn at the knuckles. A cut on his cheek had crusted over with frost, splitting anew each time he moved his face. He leaned into the weak flicker of the heat coil, adjusting the last clamp on the makeshift shelter. It wasn't elegant, just a gutted wing, thermal foil, and 2 spools of salvage cable. But it held, mostly, enough to trap heat, at least for tonight. The HUD in his collar flashed red again. Promethean 6. Rescue Ida. 15 days, 4 hours. He exhaled through his nose. Even that hurt. 15 days. On this planet. Kane looked up at the skyline. Jagged spires of frozen alloy and shattered stone. Remnants of Promethean 6's once glorious ambitions. The colony had been abandoned a decade ago, left to rot when atmospheric control systems failed, and the winters crept further into the bones of the world. The planet had once been called Daedalus, a name given by hopeful engineers and off-world planners. Kane remembered the files. High-altitude agriculture, they'd said. Resilient biosoils, temperate stability. Bullshit. The air was barely breathable. The ground never thawed. Now the place was a mausoleum with frostbite. Kane wiped his brow with a cloth, then immediately regretted it. Sweat froze too fast here. He needed to conserve power, water, food. He'd already mapped the ration count twice in his head. 3 sealed protein packs, 2 liters of meltable ice, 1 flask of heat gel for his boots. If he was careful, he could stretch it. If nothing went wrong. Something cracked out in the distance. He froze. Not wind, not ice. It came again, slow, metallic, like something dragging across ruined steel. Kane rose silently and grabbed his salvaged impact rifle. The charge cell was half dead, and it jammed more often than it fired, but it was better than nothing. He moved toward the edge of the firelight and scanned the crumbling ridgeline. Nothing. Only the howl of wind slipping through wreckage and snow swirling under a dying sky. Still, he knew he'd heard it. This wasn't the first time. Since the crash, something had been watching. He'd caught glimpses, blue streaks darting between ruins, impressions in the snow, movement in the corner of his eye. Always distant, always gone by the time he turned. At first he thought it was trauma, concussion, starvation. Then he started leaving food out. The first morning, the ration bar was gone. The next, the wrapper remained, tucked neatly under a rock as if in thanks. He said nothing, kept quiet, kept watching. But that night, on the 4th cycle since his crash, she came to him. She stepped into the firelight without warning. No sound, no threat posture. Tall, alien, cold as silence itself. She wore the remains of something ceremonial, cloth torn into practical shapes, looped around her waist and over one shoulder. Her skin, pale blue, looked almost gray under the flickering firelight, etched with faint markings that pulsed softly like embers through frost. Her hair was long, wild, impossibly white. It fell over her shoulder in rough braids, tipped with snow. She didn't look at him as she stepped forward. Her gaze was fixed just above his head, measured, formal, almost rehearsed. Then she knelt, not out of weakness, not from fear, from training. "I can guard your shelter," she said. Her voice was flat, formal, perfectly enunciated, as if reciting something long practiced. "I can fight, hunt. I will not eat much, and if you want, I can give you strong children." Kane's breath caught, not from shock, but from the quiet weight behind her words. He didn't lower the rifle immediately. She made no move to rise. Her expression was blank. Her shoulders were square. But there was something in her face that contradicted the rigid posture. A flicker in her eyes, a micro-hesitation in her breath. He saw it, not the strength she spoke of, but the fracture underneath. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, voice low. She blinked. "Long." "Alone?" "Yes." He hesitated, then slowly lowered the rifle. The wind picked up again, tugging at the edges of her robe. She didn't react to the cold. "I'm not here to trade shelter for sex," Kane said, blunt but not cruel. That made her pause. She turned her eyes to his, amber, haunting, unreadable. "I thought that was what males wanted," she said. "Not bitter, not sarcastic, just tired." Kane knelt across from her, careful to keep his body language open. He reached behind and pulled a food pack from the warmth of the inner shelter. He slid it across the snow. Eat, he said. She stared at it like it might vanish. Why? She asked. Because you're starving. Her hand trembled as she reached out. When she brought the packet to her lips, she bit off more than her throat could handle and gagged. She coughed, nearly dropped the meal. Instinctively, Kane moved toward her, then froze when she flinched back, teeth bared. No one's going to hurt you, he said quietly. Not here. She looked away, continued eating, slower this time. Her hands were calloused, fingertips bruised by frost. She tried not to wince as she swallowed. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated longer this time. Saria. Kane nodded. I'm Kane. She looked at him again, then at the fire. I won't take up much space. You're not taking anything, Kane said. You're sharing it. Saria said nothing. Minutes passed in silence. The fire hissed softly. Somewhere far off, that same metallic shriek echoed once more, fainter this time. Saria's head twitched slightly, her jaw tightening. You heard that? He asked. I always hear it, she said. It doesn't come close. Yet, Saria's gaze returned to the flames. Her eyes seemed less guarded now, but no less hollow. You don't belong here, she said. Kane gave a soft, bitter chuckle. Never have. A beat of silence. Why did you come? She asked. Salvage run, human supply relay. Daedalus was flagged cold and dead, but someone had to verify the beacon records. He gave a half smile. I drew the short straw. And they left you. No, Kane said. I crashed. They'll come back, maybe. She tilted her head. You're very calm. Too tired to panic. Saria studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, she shifted her body closer to the fire. Not touching him, just closer. She drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping long arms around them. Her markings, faint as ghostlight, pulsed just a little brighter. Kane didn't ask what they meant. She didn't offer. But for the first time, her eyes didn't drift away from his. Who told you that's all you're good for? He asked quietly. Saria blinked. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. He didn't press, but the question hung there. Gentle, quiet, defiant. She curled in tighter, not to hide, just to rest. And Kane sat with her, rifle in his lap, watching the shadows dance across broken walls as the fire burned low. They didn't speak again that night, but neither of them was alone anymore. Morning came without light. Only a gray haze pressing down over the ruined valley, thick and heavy as wet cloth. Kane stirred beneath his thermal shroud, breath fogging the thin air inside the shelter. The portable coil had died sometime during the night, and the cold had crept in like a thief, numbing his fingers, stiffening his back. He sat up slowly, testing each joint. Everything ached. A dull burn ran down his right side where the crash bruises had settled in deep. When he reached to rub the soreness from his ribs, a movement at the edge of the shelter stopped him. Saria was already awake. She sat cross-legged near the dead fire, wrapped in a rough layer of salvaged cloth. Snow dusted her shoulders and hair, but she didn't seem to notice. Her silver-white braid had come half loose during the night, and strands of it stirred gently in the wind that slipped through the gaps in the wreckage. She didn't look at him, just sat still, breathing slow, gaze fixed on the distant horizon beyond the shattered walls, as if watching for something, or remembering something she wished she could forget. He unzipped the emergency ration kit and set a small pack of thawed protein paste beside her without a word. Then he crouched by the windscreen and tried to spark the heater back to life. It took 3 attempts and a sharp curse under his breath, but the unit eventually stuttered back on, casting a weak orange glow. Saria hadn't touched the food. You're not eating, Kane said. I will. He turned. Why wait? She finally met his eyes, and the quiet there wasn't cold. It was calculation, not distrust, but caution. I used to eat only after others. Rank decided the order. It's a habit. You think I outrank you? No, she said. I think you're kind. The words caught him off guard more than he expected. He sat down across from her, rubbing his palms together to restore circulation. I'm just trying to keep us both alive, he said. Saria tilted her head slightly. Her markings, those faint glimmers under the skin, flickered for half a second, then faded. Kindness is rare, she said. On this world, it usually gets you killed. Kane didn't answer. There wasn't much to say to that. She wasn't wrong. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a cracked data pad, and ran a diagnostic scan. The beacon was still transmitting. Weak signal, but stable. No response yet. 15 days was the optimistic window. He'd been on military time long enough to know it could stretch far longer. He glanced at Saria again. She hadn't moved, still staring past the fire, still not eating. "You're freezing," he said. "I've endured worse." "That's not the point." He unfastened his secondary thermal layer, a padded inner vest lined with synthetic fur, and tossed it across to her. She didn't move to catch it, just looked at the vest, then at him. "You gave me food, now your warmth." "It's not a transaction, Saria." "No?" Her voice was quiet but not soft. "Then what is it?" He ran a hand through his hair, still tangled from sleep. The wound on his cheek had reopened. He dabbed at it absently with a corner of cloth. "I don't know," he admitted. "But where I come from, helping someone doesn't mean you expect something back. Especially not like that." She studied him, unreadable. "Where I come from," she said. "Those who had nothing else offered their bodies. It was the last form of trade, the only currency no one could steal." Kane's chest tightened. "How long were you alone here?" "Since they left." "Who?" "My people." That landed heavier than he'd prepared for. She said it with no bitterness, just a dry finality, like reciting the color of sky. Saria reached for the food pouch then, eating slowly, mechanically. Her hands were still shaking. He saw the hesitation in her grip, the practiced economy in each movement. She didn't look hungry. She looked punished. Like survival was something she hadn't fully consented to. He forced himself to look away. Guilt had no place here, not when he barely knew what wounds she carried. A sharp sound rang out beyond the ruins. Both of them turned instantly. Not wind, not falling debris. It was distant but deliberate. A click, then a scrape, metal on metal, followed by a low, vibrating hum that made Kane's teeth ache. He reached for the rifle. Saria was already on her feet. They moved without speaking, keeping low to the ice-slick floor, navigating broken slabs and frozen cables. Kane peeked over the rim of a crumbled outbuilding. Nothing, only wreckage, smoke frozen into jagged shapes. The distant ridge shimmered with falling snow, but nothing moved. Still, that sound. Saria pointed toward a collapsed communication tower a few clicks north. "They used to keep drones there," she whispered. "Recon, harvest class." "Drones?" She nodded. "Not many survived the evacuation, but some patrol on loop, memory loops, broken mines. Autonomous. Some. Others. Less so." Kane's pulse ticked up. He'd seen harvest drones before, semi-organic monstrosities used for colony maintenance. But without proper AI regulation, they degraded fast. If something like that was still running out there, scavenging instinctively. "We stay close today," he said. "Shelter radius. No scouting." Saria gave a slight nod, though her shoulders remained tense. Back at the shelter, Kane bolted the flap shut. The interior was cold but not frozen. The heat coil pulsed weakly now, but at least it gave them light. They didn't speak for a while, just sat, two strangers in the ruins of a failed dream. Eventually, Saria broke the silence. "I didn't think I'd live long enough to see another sentient face." "You thought I was sent here to kill you?" "I thought you were just a ghost." He looked at her then, really looked. Her jawline was sharp, but not cruel. Her eyes, amber and steady, seemed older than they should be, and her skin, marked with lines that flickered faintly with each breath, told a history in symbols he couldn't yet read. "You're not a ghost," he said. She looked away. "Not yet." Later that night, after a meal eaten in silence and a second coat of snow blanketing the wreck, Kane noticed Saria curl beside the heater unit. Not near him, not close, but not far. He watched her chest rise and fall in shallow sleep, the lines along her arms dim but steady. She hadn't asked to stay, but she hadn't left either, and something in that quiet decision felt heavier than any vow. Kane woke before the fire died. A thin halo of breath fogged around his face as he sat up inside the shelter, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. The heat coil was down to a dim red glow. A sheet of frost rimmed the interior panel where the wind had pushed through a seam in the wreckage overnight. Outside, the world lay still and colorless, gray snow over gray stone under a pale, lidless sky. Saria was already awake. She sat cross-legged near the bulkhead, working silently on a damaged air duct. using a strip of salvaged alloy as a binding brace. Her hands moved with precision, despite the red swelling on her knuckles. She hadn't asked for gloves. She hadn't asked for anything. "You're supposed to rest," Kane said quietly, not moving from his position. "I don't know how," she answered without looking up. There was no bitterness in her voice, only fact, as if rest were a language she used to speak, long forgotten now. He shifted, wrapped the emergency foil tighter around his legs, and studied her. In the dim interior light, her skin looked muted, almost steel gray. Only the faint glow beneath her tribal markings hinted at warmth, if not of the body, then of something still buried deeper. She stood to adjust a coil on the power array. The motion made her wince slightly, but she didn't stop. "You're hurt," he said. "I've been hurt before." "That's not an answer." "It is the only one I have." She moved to reset the heater without waiting for his response. When it clicked back to life and began humming softly, Kane let out a breath and pushed himself to his feet. Outside, the wind had dropped. A rare quiet settled over the valley ruins, but it felt unnatural, like the silence before a fault line slips. Kane checked the beacon patch on his collar. Still transmitting, still unread. 14 days left, he said aloud, not expecting a reply. Saria was beside him now, her gaze on the horizon beyond the collapsed ridgeline. "You trust the numbers?" she asked. "I trust the machine, not the people waiting to receive it." "They'll leave you." He turned toward her. "And what makes you so sure?" "They left me." It was the way she said it, not with spite or sorrow, but with the detached clarity of someone who had long since stopped waiting for answers. He studied her profile. The harsh angles of her jaw softened slightly by the tangled white braid over her shoulder. She didn't meet his gaze. Kane stepped outside, boots crunching softly in the snow. The air was sharp, thin. The valley stretched before him, a graveyard of rusted structures and fractured metal limbs reaching skyward like the bones of something ancient and long dead. And somewhere in that dead silence, something moved. He turned sharply, rifle instinctively rising. Nothing. Only a slow drift of snow from a broken scaffold. But he'd felt it. Back inside, Saria had resumed tightening the vent seal. He handed her a cloth. "For your hands." She took it but didn't use it right away. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, gesturing to the work. "Command support," she paused. "We were taught basic field repair, but mostly I learned from watching others. Fixing meant fewer punishments." He crouched beside her as she worked. "Was that common? Punishment for needing help?" She gave a soft exhale, almost a laugh. It was common to be discarded when no longer efficient. Kane didn't speak. He just watched her fingers tighten the final loop, then set the tool down slowly. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "I didn't ask what you were," he said finally. "I asked who you were." She turned to him then, and for the first time, she didn't look through him. She looked at him. "I don't know yet," she said. It wasn't defensive. It was honest. He nodded. "That's fair." They worked the rest of the afternoon without much talk, cleaning the snow trap intake, resetting the perimeter sensors, and moving salvage crates closer to the shelter wall. At one point, Saria used a rusted piece of the crash stabilizer to prop open the melted floor hatch. When she bent to wedge it under the edge, her braid slipped forward, and Kane caught a glimpse of the long scar that ran from behind her left ear to the base of her neck. He didn't ask about it. Not yet. The wind returned in the late afternoon. Colder now, laced with a whine that came not from nature but from something deeper, older. Kane froze at the sound. It rolled across the broken rooftops like a mechanical breath, long, pulsing, too regular to be wind. Saria's eyes flicked toward him. "It's closer." "I know." They retreated inside, set the pressure lock on the outer door, and sat near the relit heater. The temperature stabilized. The light turned golden again, casting both of their faces in a warmer hue than they'd seen in days. Kane opened a packet of protein meal and split it with her. "You eat first," he said. She hesitated, then took it. Her hands didn't shake as much this time. He broke the silence slowly. "Back when you offered yourself, that first night, did you really think I'd say yes?" "I didn't think anything," she said softly. "I only acted the way I was taught." Kane nodded slowly. "And now?" Saria met his gaze. "Now I hesitate. And it feels wrong. But I don't regret it." He leaned back against the bulkhead. "No one should be taught that's all they're good for." No one told me. They just stopped calling me anything else. The heater clicked. Outside, the moaning metal came again. Closer. Kane set his jaw. Whatever that is, it's hunting patterns. Sahria nodded. I've seen drones do that. Not just military ones. Security bots, mining rigs, old AI loops. They act like wolves when corrupted. Can they breach shelter? If they're desperate, or if they remember they used to. He adjusted the rifle in his lap. You sleep tonight, she said. I thought we agreed to alternate. You're more tired than I am. How do you know? Because I can hear your ribs grind when you move. He smiled despite himself. You're not as cold as you act. She didn't return the smile, but her voice softened. You're not as alone as you think. Kane closed his eyes for a moment. Let the warmth of the heater press against the side of his face. Let the silence between them settle again. When he opened them, Saria was already curled beside the bulkhead. Not close, but not far. Her head was turned toward the corner, her body less rigid now, her hands tucked beneath her chin. She hadn't asked permission. She'd simply stayed. And Kane, for the first time since the crash, allowed himself to feel something that wasn't dread. He allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope, not for rescue, not even for survival, but for a future in which she stayed and chose to. By the time the sun broke through the haze, it was already fading. Daedalus rarely showed its sky clearly, but when it did, the light hit everything like it was afraid to stay, soft, pale, and brief. That morning it spilled over the frost-glazed wreckage in streaks of silver. Kane stood near the eastern wall, hands buried in the warmth of his jacket sleeves, watching the broken skyline. The heater hummed behind him. Inside the shelter, Saria slept lightly, one arm curled beneath her head, her body no longer curled quite so tight. The change was subtle, but Kane noticed. He noticed everything now. The way her breath didn't hitch as sharply in sleep, the way her shoulders didn't tense at every noise. She was still alert, still cautious. But the edge had softened, just enough. When she stirred, Kane was already boiling meltwater in the heating cup. She sat up with a quiet intake of breath, stretching her arms with the deliberate care of someone used to pain. She blinked slowly and pulled her hair over one shoulder, absently undoing the braid. Kane handed her the first hot drink of the day without a word. She nodded in thanks. Her fingers brushed his, and this time she didn't pull away. They drank in silence. Then Kane spoke. I don't know much about your people, not beyond what the military files covered, mostly combat specs and threat assessments. Saria studied the steam rising from her canister. Her amber eyes flickered in the light. That's all they ever cared to know. He waited. She didn't make him wait long. I was part of the 4th Maternal Vanguard, she said. Born in a hatch nursery, bred for optimal traits, reflex, strength, fertility, memory. I was tested at 6 cycles old, bonded to a battle pod at 10. My role was layered. Mother, shield, weapon. Kane frowned. You were supposed to fight and give birth? Yes. Her tone was matter of fact. Our physiology allowed for dual function. We were taught to nurture and to destroy. Efficient biology for an inefficient galaxy. He shook his head, incredulous. What happened when the war ended? They said we were no longer necessary. Peace made us inconvenient. Our aggression, our capacity for self-determination, flaws in a post-war model. She glanced at him. They began decommissioning us. Decommissioning, Kane repeated, tasting the word. You mean killing? Some. Others were sterilized, reassigned to menial colonies. I was sent here to assist in rebuilding Daedalus, alongside surviving engineers and a few pacified combat drones. They told me it would be temporary. Her voice lost some of its evenness then. Then one day the supply ships stopped. The human contractors pulled out. The colony was written off as economically unsalvageable. Everyone left, except me. You stayed behind alone? He asked. I wasn't given the choice. They left in the night cycle. I woke to silence. Kane set his canister down slowly. No wonder you don't sleep, he said. Saria gave a quiet shrug. I learned. He studied her in the firelight, really studied her, not just her skin, which shimmered faintly in patches, or the way she held herself with soldier's precision, but the fatigue in her eyes, the fatigue of someone who had survived not because she hoped, but because she had forgotten how to stop. Kane leaned forward. You're not a machine. I was trained to be. Training can be undone. She looked away, but he saw her jaw shift, like she wanted to speak but hadn't decided if it was worth the effort. "What about you?" she asked after a beat. "What role were you trained for?" He smirked faintly, then leaned back against the hull. "Civilian contractor, mostly. I was part of a xenoanthropology delegation. We cataloged culture remnants, languages, artifact traditions, whatever still existed after conflicts. I studied people like you, from a distance, through screens and old records." Saria raised an eyebrow. "And now?" "Now I salvage junk and try not to die in freezing windstorms." A beat passed. Then she asked, "Why leave your world?" "Earth isn't a dead colony." Kane hesitated. The truth tasted heavier than he liked. "I was engaged once," he said. "She wanted a quiet life. I didn't. Thought I needed something larger. Went on a contract to the outpost for 6 months. Came back 2 years later." "She left?" "She waited," he said softly, "for a while. But eventually she realized I was more committed to the unknown than I was to her. I didn't argue." Saria didn't speak. She just watched him in that quiet, measured way of hers, like she was reading between the words he didn't say. "So you drifted," she said. "Yeah." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, the coarse stubble catching on his glove. "I didn't think I'd survive the crash. Not really. And I didn't think I'd meet someone like you out here." Saria looked down at her canister, then said something so soft he barely caught it. "I didn't think anyone would still speak to me. You don't talk like someone forgotten. I talk like someone afraid of being remembered for the wrong things." The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was full of everything they'd said and everything they didn't have to. Outside, the wind shifted, low and slow. Saria tilted her head toward the sound. "We're not alone out there." Kane stood. "Still no movement on the motion grid, but something's watching." "I know." "Then we'll watch back." She turned toward him, and this time, there was something new in her eyes. Wary, yes, but warmer. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something like it. "You stay," she said, voice low. "I'll scan perimeter." Kane hesitated. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not. I just want to be useful." He stepped in front of her. "You already are." She blinked. Her eyes dropped, then returned to his face. A pause. A breath. She nodded and turned toward the outer door. As it hissed closed behind her, Kane remained by the heater, fingers wrapped around the cooling mug. For the first time since the crash, he wasn't planning his own survival. He was thinking about hers, and what might happen if they both kept choosing to stay. The storm hit just after dusk, slamming into the valley with the force of a collapsing sky. Wind howled through broken girders and collapsed towers, carrying snow like shards of glass. Inside the shelter, the fire coil coughed and flickered. The warmth barely reached the walls. Kane checked the rescue beacon again. 12 days remaining. 12 days. And now that number no longer felt like a countdown to salvation. It felt like a wager. A thin red promise against the weight of steel and silence pressing in from all sides. Saria returned from patrol just before the worst of the storm settled. Her braid was rimmed with frost, her skin flushed blue-white from the cold, but her movements were still precise, fluid, not panicked, not even hurried. "You saw something," Kane said before she could speak. She nodded once. "Lower ridge, the shadow again, closer." "Machine?" "I couldn't confirm, but it mimicked my pacing. Paused when I paused. Shifted direction when I did. It wasn't wandering." "Then it's watching," Kane said, jaw tightening. Saria unwrapped the ice-stiff outer cloth from her arms and crouched near the heater. Her eyes were still fixed on some invisible place beyond the wall. "It's testing us," she murmured, "probing for weakness. I've seen this behavior before." Kane moved to the viewport slit. Wind scoured the snow into blinding currents. Nothing visible. But he trusted her. "You think it's a drone?" "Number drones don't move like that. They don't wait." He turned. "Then what?" She looked up at him, face stark in the firelight. "A reclaimer." He froze. "I thought those were decommissioned. They were supposed to be. But a few units survived the shutdown protocols. Long-range autonomous recon machines, Thalkai made, used for battlefield retrieval and biotag recovery. When the war ended, they stopped receiving commands, so they made their own." "And now they're hunting?" he asked. Saria's voice dropped. "Not hunting, purging." Anything without a current combat ID is classified as scrap. Kane exhaled slowly. So we're both ghosts to it. She nodded once. You're not on its registry. I was removed from mine. Outside, the wind screamed. They worked in silence. Kane reinforced the doorway with a third salvage panel and rerouted power to double-charge the emergency beacon, just in case. Saria moved with the same brutal efficiency she always did. No wasted steps, no questions asked. But something in her movements had changed, not her speed, her tension. She was preparing for war. As Kane anchored the outer seal with a makeshift brace, his hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away. They shared a glance, brief, breathless, unspoken. The storm howled louder, but they didn't move from that closeness for a long second. Later, inside, they huddled near the heat coil. The glow reflected off her markings, still faint, but no longer cold. Kane's voice was quiet when he asked, "Do you think it'll attack tonight?" If it was human, yes, but machines don't work by fear. They wait until you stop preparing. Then we won't. She looked at him with something unreadable in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but not suspicion either. Something in between, a truce formed through shared cold. "I'm taking first watch," she said. "I can take it." "No." Her tone was gentle but firm. "You need rest." He paused, then nodded. "Wake me if you hear anything." "I always hear everything." Hours passed. Wind battered the walls, but the storm began to thin, fading to intermittent gusts and snow flurries. Saria stood at the entrance, eyes sharp, posture calm. Kane dozed lightly, half-conscious, rifle at his side. Then the sound came. Not the wind, not the storm. Metal, groaning, rhythmic, deliberate. Saria's voice was low but urgent. "Kane!" He was on his feet instantly. They both moved to the viewport. There, across the field of jagged stone and buried salvage, something shifted, large, angular, moving with terrible patience. Its form gleamed faintly beneath the stormlight, more silhouette than shape, but unmistakably artificial. Kane raised the rifle. "If it gets closer, it won't approach directly," Saria said. "It'll wait, until it thinks we've broken routine, so we stay alert." "Yes," her jaw tensed. "If it breaches, we won't survive open combat." Kane watched her. She wasn't afraid. But something colder lived in her eyes now, a memory of something brutal. "You've seen one up close, haven't you?" She nodded once. "It took my squad, left me breathing." "Why?" She looked at him. "Because I was beneath its threshold for viable salvage, not worth retrieving, not worth destroying." Kane felt his stomach turn. "It spared you because it didn't need you." "Yes," she met his eyes. "That's the first time I understood what it meant to be discarded." Neither of them spoke for a while. Eventually, she sat beside him again. Not for warmth, there was little left, but for presence. 12 days, he said, almost to himself. "Until rescue." 12 days, she echoed. "Too many for peace. Too few for a future." He turned toward her. "But enough time to stay alive." Her gaze didn't leave his. "If we do, what happens next?" "I don't know," Kane said honestly. "But I'm not planning on leaving you behind." She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his, light as snowfall. And in the flickering light of that failing heater, beside the sound of distant metal and wind, neither of them moved away. The reclaimer struck just before dawn, not with warning, not with noise, with precision. Kane didn't see it, he felt it. The vibration through the floor, the sudden drop in air pressure, the way the shelter groaned as something vast and mechanical braced against the walls. Then the tearing began. Metal screamed as a clawed appendage punched through the barricade. Sparks flew. A blizzard of snow and insulation erupted into the room. Kane grabbed his rifle, rolled to cover, and fired blind toward the breach. Saria didn't hesitate. She grabbed the satchel, tore Kane's coat sleeve, and hauled him bodily through the emergency hatch as another impact collapsed the outer wall behind them. They ran, not toward safety. There was none. But through a labyrinth of broken corridors and frozen pipelines, down into the bowels of Daedalus, the forgotten arteries of a dead city, half buried in ice and silence. They didn't stop until Kane collapsed. The wound along his ribs, reopened in the scramble, had bled through 3 layers of cloth. He sagged to one knee beneath the broken vent of a long-dead coolant shaft. Saria caught him under the arms, lowered him to the floor, and sealed them inside. Then at last came silence. Not peace, just the stillness that followed violence. The next 2 days passed in shadows. They took shelter in the narrow cavity beneath the substructure. No light reached them there, and little warmth. But the reclaimer didn't follow. Saria assumed it had circled back to assess the shelter ruins, perhaps scanning for movement, perhaps recalibrating. Machines like that didn't give up. They adapted. They waited. Kane drifted in and out of sleep, his skin cold and slick with sweat. The wound had begun to fester, and the pain dulled his voice to a whisper. Saria cared for him with calm precision. She rationed their last protein bar over 3 meals, melted ice through a worn filter, changed his dressing twice with scraps of heat cloth. She didn't speak often, but she stayed close. The air inside their hiding place was dry and metallic, tasting faintly of rust and decay. The shelter's emergency heater had been left behind. The only warmth came from each other. On the second night, Kane stirred. His voice cracked. "How long?" 2 days, Saria answered, her hand already at his forehead. "The signal's still active. Drone hasn't returned." He tried to sit up, failed. "You should have gone." She didn't reply. "I mean it," he whispered. "Left me. Found the extraction point." "I don't leave the wounded," she said simply. Kane gave a pained smile. "That's soldier talk." "I never stopped being one," she said, not proudly, just plainly. She shifted to check the bandage. Her hands, though stiff from cold, remained steady. "You have a fever," she added, "but it's not deep yet." Kane chuckled once. "That's reassuring." Saria watched him a moment, then did something she hadn't done since the crash. She lay down beside him, not for heat, not even for comfort, but because she was tired of keeping the distance between them alive. Kane said nothing, but his breathing slowed. By the third morning, 10 days remaining, the air shifted. Kane was stronger, still pale, still slow, but coherent. Saria emerged briefly from their hideaway, risking a scan of the horizon through a cracked panel. The reclaimer was gone, not far, but not waiting. When she returned, Kane was sitting upright, pale but steady. He looked up. "We moved today." She nodded. "Northeast. I remember a relay station half a click out. Elevation might boost the signal." "You're sure you can carry me? You're not heavy." He winced as she hauled him upright, one arm over her shoulder. "Don't lie to make me feel better." "I wasn't." They climbed, out of the tunnel, past blackened wires and cracked bulkheads. The cold hit them instantly, stinging like fire after days underground. But the sun was clear, cutting through the haze above Daedalus with an icy brilliance that made the ruins look almost holy. They didn't speak. Words would have broken something sacred. They reached the station by mid-morning. The comms relay was buried in ice, but still standing, barely. Saria hacked into the console with a cracked diagnostic stick, rerouted power through the satellite interface, and resent Kane's beacon burst manually. This time it responded. Signal confirmed. Location locked. Rescue inbound. Kane watched her work, breath fogging the air. The wind caught her braid and tugged it free. She looked nothing like the woman who had first stepped into his firelight. Not just because of the dirt and frost, but because of the stillness in her now. Like she no longer expected to be abandoned. When she finished, she turned to him. 12 days, she said. Kane gave a hoarse laugh. Give or take. Saria stepped closer. Her gaze searched his face, lingering on the bruises, the strain, the ragged breath. Then she reached for his hand. Kane took it. No promises, no speeches, just a single decision made quietly between two people who had nothing left to prove. The wind howled again, but softer now, and far in the sky the clouds began to thin. The rescue drone came at dawn. No fanfare, no roar of engines, just a low mechanical hum that cut through the silence like a memory. The sky for once was clear. Thin light slanting over the bones of Daedalus as if trying to make amends. Frost caught on shattered rails, ruined towers, and half-buried statues that still reached skyward. Kane sat beneath the relay mast, legs stretched out over frozen stone, his side bound tight with cloth that had once been part of Saria's tunic. He heard the sound before he saw it, a black dot, moving slow, steady. The drone broke atmosphere in a glide, sunlight flashing across its undercarriage. They came, he said. Saria stood beside him, silent. Her braid was pulled back, her hands clasped behind her. She didn't react to the drone. She watched the valley, as if the moment wasn't real until it touched the ground. The drone circled once, then began its descent toward the pre-designated landing zone, flat terrain 300 meters south, just beyond the hollow remains of a collapsed biodome. Kane had picked that site on day 2. It felt like a lifetime ago. He pushed himself to his feet. Every movement ached, but he was upright. "I can walk," he said. Saria didn't answer. She simply waited. Together they crossed the frost-bitten field, step by step, boots crunching through thin layers of ice. The wind was low, whispering only once every few paces. Kane kept glancing sideways at her, as if expecting her to vanish. She didn't. When they reached the landing site, the drone had already deployed its legs. The hull opened with a hiss. A single crewman in a white EVA suit emerged, tablet in hand. "Kane Thorne? That's me. You're late." Kane laughed once, a rough sound. "You're early." The crewman looked behind him. "Who's the other?" Kane didn't move. "She's with me." A pause. Measured. No visible reaction. "We weren't informed of a second survivor." "You are now." Another pause. Then a nod. "Medical evaluation and biometric intake are required before departure. She'll need to submit to scan." "She'll consent to that," Kane said calmly, "if she agrees to board." Only then did he turn. Saria hadn't moved. She stood just beyond the shadow of the drone, facing him. Her eyes, always calm, flicked between him and the open ramp. The light inside the vessel spilled golden warmth across the ground. Alien to this planet. Artificial. Safe. But she didn't move forward. "This is where you go," she said. Kane stepped toward her. "This is where we go." Her brow tensed, but her voice stayed even. "I was not designed for comfort, or bureaucracy, or soft landings. I know. I don't want to be studied, or repurposed. I don't want to be asked what I can breed or break. I won't let them. They'll ask anyway." Kane nodded slowly. "Then I'll stand in front of you, like you stood in front of me." That silenced her. The breeze shifted, brushing a lock of hair across her face. "You said I had value," she said. "But what if I'm only useful in a place like this?" "You're not useful to me," Kane replied. "You matter to me." For the first time, she looked away. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "No one does." Another beat of silence. Then she whispered, "I'm afraid." He stepped closer. "So am I." That was all. She stepped forward, crossed the final distance, not with confidence, but with decision. Inside the drone, the temperature climbed by 30 degrees. Saria flinched instinctively, her skin prickling as warmth soaked into her bones. Kane unzipped his jacket, handed it to her. She took it, held it for a moment before shrugging it on. The sleeves were too short, but she didn't take it off. The crewman led them to opposite benches, ran the standard vital scan. Kane's readings were flagged for infection, dehydration, bone bruising. Saria's readings weren't interpreted. The system threw up 3 error codes before defaulting to manual data entry. "Species unrecognized," the crewman muttered. "She's unique," Kane replied without flinching. They didn't speak during ascent. Kane sat across from her, watching the frozen planet drop away beneath them. His fingers trembled faintly from exhaustion, but his eyes never left her. Saria sat upright, still, composed, but not cold, not anymore. "You'll need to adapt," she said quietly. "So will you." "What if I can't?" "Then I'll help you try again." Her gaze found his. "And if I fail?" Kane gave the smallest smile. "You already didn't." Silence settled again, quiet and full. Beyond the hull, stars gathered. They would arrive in orbit in hours. Debriefings, scans, questions would follow. Earth's governments would want explanations. The Anthropological Council would want answers, maybe even control. But none of that mattered yet. In the corner of the small cabin, Kane's pack sat unopened. Inside it, the original survey map of Daedalus was still folded. Coordinates circled, names handwritten beside ruins. Saria's name had been added, not as a location, as a beginning. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Kane did the same. And as the drone left the dead world behind, neither of them dreamed of the past. They dreamed of firelight and hands that chose to stay. The room was warm, not artificially warm like the drone cabin, or bitterly warm like the heat coils of Daedalus, but honestly warm. Sunlight filtered through real glass, soft and golden, painting the pale walls with slow-moving light. The air smelled faintly of wild lavender and something sweet, Maybe fruit left out on the table too long. They were safe now. In the rehabilitation quarters of a low-orbit research station above Europa's sister moon, both of them had been given temporary housing. Sterile, clean, stocked with necessities, but impersonal. Cain had hated it at first. So had Saria. But this room, their shared one, had become something different. It had become theirs. They sat by the window in silence. Cain leaned against the frame, sleeves rolled up, a thin scar still visible beneath the cuff of his shirt. His ribs had mostly healed. He moved slowly now, only out of habit. Saria sat cross-legged on the cushion beside him, back against the wall. Her braid was loose. Her bare shoulders glowed faintly where the sun touched her, light blue skin kissed with warmth. For the first time in days, her markings shimmered like soft ink in water, not with distress, but peace. She held a half-sliced peach in one hand, bit into it slowly. Cain watched her with a crooked smile. "I thought you didn't like fruit." "I thought I didn't either," she said, chewing. "But it's not the taste I remember hating. It's the softness." He raised a brow. "That's poetic." She turned her eyes toward him, steady, amused. "I'm not trying to be." "I know. That's what makes it work." She set the peach aside and leaned back, stretching her arms overhead. The motion was unguarded. Her eyes half-lidded. Her body, once wound like a loaded weapon, now moved like it had learned to exist without defense. Cain looked out the window. "How many days has it been?" "Since Daedalus?" she asked. "Since I thought I'd die there." She looked at him. 10. He nodded. "Feels like 100. "Or 1, she said, stretched long and soft. He smiled at that, a quiet, content smile that didn't ask for more. Saria reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. The gesture was simple, but it stopped him. "You don't flinch anymore," he said. "Neither do you," she whispered. Their eyes met. No adrenaline, no hunger, no desperation. Just the shared understanding that they had earned this. He leaned forward slightly, hand reaching to rest against her knee. Her fingers found his without hesitation. They stayed that way for a moment, hands folded together, legs touching lightly, foreheads nearly aligned. "I thought this would feel strange," she murmured, not fearing what comes next. "It does," Cain said, "but only because we're used to surviving, not living." She tilted her head. "And now, I want more days like this, with you. Sunlight, soft fruit, and silence. No guns, no freezing wind, no metal gods hunting us. Just warmth," he said, "and your voice." She leaned in first. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't practiced. Her lips touched his with the gentleness of breath. Tentative, searching, unsure. Like she wasn't kissing a man but asking a question. And when he answered, when he deepened the kiss, slow and steady, his hand rising to her jaw, his body pulling her closer, she relaxed fully for the first time in her life. There was no armor between them anymore. Just shared skin and quiet sighs, sunlight and warmth, and the knowledge that neither of them needed to be anything but present. When they finally parted, her forehead rested against his. She was smiling. "You're softer than you pretend to be," she said. He grinned. "Don't ruin my reputation." "You never had one." He laughed, breathless and content. They stayed by the window long after the sun dipped behind the curve of the station's horizon. No alarms, no orders, no past. Just one moment. The kind that doesn't ask for anything except to be remembered, and they would, always. Later that night, long after the lights had dimmed and the stars shimmered like watchful embers outside the window, they lay curled on the same cot, arms tangled, breath slowed. Neither of them spoke for a long while. It was Saria who broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Cain." "I've been thinking about what I said to you that first night when I offered you children." He didn't move, didn't tense. "I remember. I didn't mean it, not the way I should have." He turned toward her then. His hand found hers in the dark. "I know. I said it like a transaction, like I was giving you something you wanted so I could survive." She hesitated. "But now, I want you to know, if we ever did, if it ever happened, it wouldn't be because I thought I had to." He breathed out slowly, the weight of her words settling like quiet snowfall. "It would be because I wanted to share something with you," she said. "Not just my body, something ours." His voice cracked when he answered. "I'd raise them with you, proudly." She didn't reply. She only moved closer. Her head rested against his shoulder. Her hand found his chest. Fingers splayed gently over the steady rise and fall of his breath. Through the thin fabric, she could feel the beat of his heart, quiet but strong, steady, human. Kane didn't move, didn't speak. He just let her be there, let her feel, let her listen. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the station's life support systems and the distant crackle of recycled air. Warmth wrapped around them in invisible layers, not the artificial kind they had fought so long to find, but the kind they had built between them. Saria shifted slightly. The tip of her nose brushed the line of his jaw. Her breath was warm against his skin. He closed his eyes at the sensation, small but grounding. Her hand slid slowly up his chest, fingers trailing the hollow between his collarbones, not demanding, not testing, just exploring. He opened his eyes. "Saria," he said, barely above a whisper. She looked up at him. Her gaze was steady, unblinking. There was no doubt in her expression, no fear, only something deeper. A hunger, yes, but not just of the body, a need to connect, to anchor, to feel real in a world that had so long made her feel discarded. He reached for her, cupped her cheek. Her skin was cool, faintly luminescent in the low light. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she leaned into the touch like it was the first kindness she'd ever believed was meant for her. "You're sure?" he asked. She didn't answer with words. She rose onto her knees beside him and leaned forward, pressing her mouth to his. The kiss was slow, unhurried, deep. Not a collision, but a conversation. Her hands found his shoulders, then his neck, fingers curling there as if to steady herself. Or him. He kissed her back just as slowly, his hands moving to her waist. She shifted again, swinging a leg across his lap, settling herself in his arms, astride him, chest to chest. Her body was warm now, her breath quickening. The heat between them no longer came from a furnace or a blanket, but from each other. She moved her lips to his cheek, to his throat, tasting him like he was something sacred. Kane let his head fall back, breathing her name like a prayer. Saria. She hadn't touched anyone this way before. Not truly. Not without duty wrapped around her wrists like shackles. But now there was no expectation, no command. There was just her, and him, and choice. Her hips shifted subtly against his, testing the space between them, the tension in his body. She felt it all. The way he trembled when her hands brushed under his shirt. The way his breath stuttered when she leaned in to press her mouth just below his ear. He responded to her not as a man who expected anything, but as someone amazed he was wanted. And she did want him. Not because of his strength, not because of his warmth or his cleverness or his calm, but because he had seen her and never looked away. She guided his hands to her back, then to her waist, then lower, inviting touch with silent permission. Every movement they made now was slow, conscious, reverent, like they were learning each other not in a rush of passion, but in a language neither had ever been taught. He held her gently. She rode the rhythm of their closeness like a wave building, cresting slowly, not frantic but deep, raw. She buried her face in his neck, her breath stuttering as her body trembled with rising sensation. He whispered her name again, kissed her shoulder, her collarbone, her hair. She gasped once, not from surprise, from release. It hit her not like a blaze, but like a rising tide, sweeping through her from core to skin, leaving nothing untouched, nothing hidden. She clung to him, her body pressed flush against his, heart pounding against his chest. And Kane, he just held her through it, grounded her, moved with her, breathed her in like something rare and vital. When it was over, she stayed curled against him, every inch of her still humming. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his cheek against her temple. His breath was uneven, his heartbeat wild, but his hands were steady on her back. They stayed that way for a long time. No words, just warmth, just truth. Eventually, she pulled back to look at him. Her eyes were softer than he'd ever seen them, glowing faintly, not from power, not from shame, from peace. "I didn't know," she said, voice ragged. "Didn't know what? That I could feel this, that it could be gentle." Kane kissed her forehead. "Now you do." She nodded. Then almost shyly, she pressed her palm to his chest again. And for the first time since their world had collapsed, she didn't feel like a weapon. She felt like a woman. And in his arms, she knew she had come home.